Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our program, Unique Considerations in Petroleum and Commercial Fuel Transactions. My name is Larry Parker, and I'm a partner and chair of the firm's Mergers and Acquisitions team, and I am based in our Richmond office. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, Otto Konrad. Otto is a partner on our corporate team, and he focuses on the petroleum and commercial fuel mergers and acquisitions. He's based here in our Richmond office as well.
Thank you, Larry.
Before we get started, Otto, a few housekeeping items. Please make sure that if you have any questions, use your Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit them. We'll answer questions at the end, time permitting. If your question's not answered in the presentation, don't worry. We'll reach out to you following the presentation, and our marketing team will collect the questions and submit them to us so that we can do that, along with your contact information. If you're having any audio or technical problems, please use the Q&A button as well, and they can help you. You'll receive a copy of the presentation materials and a link to the recording following the program later this afternoon. Okay, Otto. So please give us an overview of the legal aspects of the petroleum industry M&A.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you for your help in putting this together, and thank you also to our client marketing team too for organizing this. It's quite the what's the word? It's a feat I can see to put this thing together, and I appreciate everyone's help. So yeah, let's go ahead and just get oriented a little bit in this specific industry that I work within. Most of us think of petroleum as something we buy at the street level, at a store at the street. And to further complicate things, a lot of street level retail is what we call branded. So, and what I mean by that is the fuel is being sold under a trademark associated with a refiner or an entity that historically has been a refiner. But for the most part, retailers are not refiners. So if you see your local Exxon, it is more likely that it's a independently owned concern that's selling gas under the brand of Exxon. Now, at the street level, you've got retailers. Then you have what are called the distributors or the jobbers. We call this also the middle market. And these are the concerns that buy fuel from the refiners or the producers and in turn sell it to the retailers. And then at the very top of this chain is the actual refiners and producers as well. And for the most part, you all know them. They're the historical brands that you think of when you think of gasoline, such as Exxon or Conoco or Shell or BP. So those are the three tranches. Most of the work that I do is at the retail level and the distributor jobber level. I occasionally do a little bit of work with refiners directly, but it's usually in the middle market and at the retail level. As far as what we are dealing with when we're doing an M&A transaction in this industry, we're selling typically convenience stores or we're selling terminaling facilities, places where distributors store large amounts of petroleum products, and we're selling contracts. You know, a lot of the industry's assets are really tied up in long-term contracts for the sale of petroleum. If you have a retailer that is selling gas on the street, they're getting that gas pursuant to a contract likely with a distributor, where they're buying fuel for, say, 3 to 10 years pursuant to that contract. And that contract itself is an asset that gets sold in M&A transactions. Because convenience stores are so regulated, because what they sell is heavily regulated, it's a very multidisciplinary and M&A transaction area. So you're going to have corporate issues. You're going to have, of course, real estate and zoning issues in the transaction. You're going to, of course, have environmental, licensing and permitting and intellectual property. And depending on the size of the transaction, you may also have FTC concerns. So M&A work in this area touches a lot of different practice teams and a lot of different substantive issues. So that's sort of the basic overview, Larry, of what we're talking about here.
why don't you tell us a little bit about how reps and warranties insurance is affecting the industry, and then some other trends you're seeing in definitive agreements?
Sure, Larry. Those of us who work in this space on a regular basis, the last 5 years especially, there's been a lot of hullabaloo and a lot of noise about reps and warranties insurance. And for those who aren't familiar with it, it's an insurance product that basically is intended to replace most of the time, part of the reps and warranties that would be in a typical M&A asset purchase agreement or equity purchase agreement. And it's intended to shift essentially the legal risk of the rep and warranties from a party to the transaction to an insurance company. So it's a product that's been heavily marketed and sold. I'm sure Larry and I have had multiple meetings with various representatives of insurance companies that are pitching this particular product. In my experience, its impact is still relatively limited. And that's for a variety of reasons, I think. First of all, it tends to be easiest to get this kind of insurance when you're just dealing with what I'll call the legal reps, which is due organization, authority, non-contravention of contracts and agreements, those kinds of reps and warranties, which also tend to be the least, I guess the word is, there's just not a lot of issues that kick up either before closing or after closing under those reps and warranties. They're not controversial. And the due diligence that the insurance companies need to do for them is relatively limited. So it's easy for them to do it, but it also has value that's kind of limited. The reps and warranties that really matter in a transaction tend to be more focused on the property condition or potential litigation, that might be out there. That having been said, you do see it, I think, in larger transactions, Larry, particularly when the seller is private equity owned, and they're interested in divesting themselves of the asset they're selling and not having any residual liabilities. In a typical transaction at a smaller mid-market level, the seller is going to have some reps and warranties that are going to survive from 6 months to a year to 18 months. And for a seller who is intimately familiar with their business, let's say it's a 40-store chain that's been owned in the family for 4 generations, and the current son or daughter that runs the business has had his or her hands in it intimately for years. They're going to have a comfort with the reps and warranties and the risk associated with those surviving after the closing. It's different than a situation where you have an equity firm who just owns the equity for investment purposes and is now selling the asset and doesn't want to be tagged after closing with liability for a rep or warranty. So larger transactions that equity firms own, you'll see reps and warranty insurance kicking up more as a deal term. But in the mid to lower market deals, you don't typically see it. It doesn't add that much value frankly, to the transaction moving forward. And the sellers at those levels are comfortable with the standard reps and warranties that are being given. Other areas that are sort of in flux in terms of contract terms. Recently, I've noticed there's been a kick up in a sacred cow deposits. For years, it just goes like the sun that a buyer is going to post a deposit in a purchase scenario. Just a standard, basic, fundamental deal term. But in the last couple of years, some of the larger sellers who are trying to, or I should say buyers, but no, sellers. No, I'm sorry, buyers who are trying to do transactions in a programmatic way are trying to get the sellers to waive the deposit requirement. So these are usually publicly traded entities, and they have pretty developed in-house departments that are doing their M&A work. And they've decided that Their brand is credit worthy enough that nobody needs a deposit. So that's one trend that's been coming up, and how it falls, of course, varies from transaction to transaction and bargaining power, between the buyers and the sellers. But that's something that's a little bit in flux. Another thing that I see that's always in flux is the property condition rep and warranty. You would think that when you're dealing with physical assets like gas stations and convenience stores, that buyers always get very comprehensive property condition reps and warranties, but it doesn't always fall that way. I work on transactions where the seller makes no reps and warranties or very minimal reps and warranties, maybe operating condition. And then there are transactions that still fall into the, good operating condition, ordinary wear and tear accepted, but it's all over the place right now. There's no sort of consistent, in my view, starting point for property condition reps and warranties. It's very much negotiated on a case-by-case basis in most of the transactions that I work on. The other item that I find to be very fluid is post-closing escrow. So typically in an M&A transaction, the buyer will want an escrow put in place to secure the seller's contingent liabilities for the reps and warranties, so that they have some recourse, easy recourse to being paid out if there's a claim that arises under the reps and warranties. I find though in a lot of convenience store transactions that that escrow is not required by the buyer. They still do happen, but not with the frequency that I think they do in the larger M&A context. And I think that has to do with the knowledge base of the buyers. I think that the relative sophistication of the parties that are buying these things gives them a sense of they have a well-developed sense of what due diligence they need and what the risks are that they are concerned about. So those are the big trends in the actual purchase agreements. I've got a little bit of time left here. You want to talk really quickly about legislative things that are happening?
Yeah, tell us the things you're watching from the legislative front that might impact the industry.
On the federal level, there really is not all that much happening. I went on a legislative lobbying trip earlier this year to Congress for Sigma, and I was working the halls in Congress advocating for tax credit parity between biofuel used in diesel and jet fuel. The other issue we were lobbying about was credit card competition. Right now, there's a duopoly between Visa and MasterCard on credit cards, and we want to have some other providers of the processors of the processing for those cards besides those two big concerns, so that the fees that are being charged are reduced. In the debit card world, that was successfully legislated a number of years ago, and it's resulted in billions of dollars of savings. So there's a lot of energy around that. And then the other one that we were pressing on was year-round E15. Right now, E15 is only available by essentially executive order. But nobody is going to invest in the infrastructure that they need to sell gasoline that has E15, ethanol 15 in it, unless it's statutorily permitted to be sold. So that's the federal level. On the Virginia level, there are two big hot issues. One is these skill gaming machines that you see now in C-stores everywhere in Virginia. They're a big revenue generator for the stores. And so retailers, all the operators, they love them, and they're material to their business. In 2021, the Virginia Assembly banned these. There was a court challenge that was promptly filed, and the case is going to be tried on December 18th, 19th, and 20th. This year here. So we're going to have a court order here at some point ruling on the legality of this prohibition against these gaming machines. And the issue is all revolving around whether or not it's gambling or there's a sufficient level of skill associated with these games that they don't fall within the gambling prohibitions. So we'll be watching that. The other big item, this is something of real concern for distributors, the middle market in this business. There are a group of retailers up in Northern Virginia who are making an effort to have what's called the Virginia PMPA expanded to encompass distributors and not just refiners. Historically, the Virginia Petroleum Marketing Practices Act covered refiners, but distributors were exempted from it. They're trying to expand it to distributors, and the practical impact of that is, if that happens, if a distributor has a convenience store that they want to sell, that they own the real estate on, and they want to sell it, they're going to have to, by statutory obligation, they're going to have to extend the right of first refusal to the dealer. And the other significant element of this is, if the dealer exercises the ROFR, the right of first refusal, they get to terminate any supply agreement that's associated with the site. So the distributor who owns the real estate has the potential devaluation of the real estate value because of the ROFR, and perhaps even more significantly, that supply agreement. Remember, I said at the outset of this little program how valuable contracts are in this space. That contract is going to be terminated if the ROFR is exercised. So it's economically very significant for distributors. And they took a run at this in the last legislative assembly. The word on the street is it's going to happen again. There's going to be another run at it. So everybody in the industry will be watching, in Virginia will be watching closely what happens with that Virginia PMPA amendment. I think that covers it. We have a little bit of time for questions.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. So we may have a couple questions. I don't see any in the Q&A box, but if anybody did submit a question, we will certainly be in touch after the presentation. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.